Good evening, and welcome to the 32nd celebration of the Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting in the Public Interest, as well as the first Goldsmith Prize for Explanatory Reporting. Think of this as Harvard's feast day for the First Amendment and all the freedoms that it protects. There is much that we are going to praise and cheer tonight, but it would be tone deaf, maybe, for me to stand here celebrating the superb work of our honorees without addressing what has changed for the reporters who are trying to do the work that we depend on them to do. We're getting to know our institutions better right now as we watch them shudder and suffer and struggle to perform their essential purposes. These past weeks of assault and battery on the very idea of public service have been harrowing to watch, much less to live. Scientists, accountants, safety experts, technologists, especially technologists, all hurled into uncertainty by a massive and unprecedented experiment in the rapid disassembly of government before our eyes. For the most part, they are not Democrats or Republicans. They do not serve an agenda. They serve us. And the reporters we rely on to investigate and explain are navigating not just the normal steeplechase of chasing a hard story. They're facing more lawsuits, more harassment, more online threats, just as they try to go about doing their jobs. So as we celebrate tonight's winners for their objectively excellent work, we also recognize that going forward, our reporters are going to be facing a degree of difficulty that is unprecedented and maybe existential, and at just the moment when our sprawling, splintered information environment of podcasts and Substacks and TikTokers and YouTubers still are dependent on the frontline troops who go out and do the actual reporting. And it is that way that journalists bear witness to what we are watching happen that we honor tonight. It's never been more important to elevate and celebrate the excellence that they bring to their work. We also get to honor the author of 2 books that illuminate the intersection between media and politics and public person, and celebrate the career of an extraordinary journalist whose open-minded, open-hearted, fearless reporting has helped us make sense of the world for the past 30 years. The Goldsmith Awards were founded in 1991 thanks to the generosity of the Greenfield family, whose foundation has supported it ever since. I'm so glad that trustees Jill Greenfield Feldman, Rachel Feldman, Bill Epstein, Samantha Clark, and Mike Greenfield are here with us. We'll start with the Goldsmith Books Prize, which my colleague Tom Patterson, the Bradley Professor of Government and the Press, will present.
I'm accustomed to the ropes.
I know. What's up with that?
Book prizes are awarded each year, one for the best recent academic book and one for the best recent trade book in the field of media, politics, and public policy. As chosen by the selection committee, which this year consisted of Matt Baum, Jeff Seglin, and myself, the academic winner is Political Rumors: Why We Accept Misinformation and How to Fight It. When cable news came along in the 1980s, and then the internet in the 1990s, I was among those who thought we were entering an era of more informed and engaged public. That's happened to a degree, but it's been accompanied by a lot of bad stuff, including a slew of misinformation. So much of it that it almost defies systematic analysis. Our award-winning book reduces that complexity by focusing on a particular type of misinformation, the type with the greatest impact on our politics. That type is the political rumor, factually incorrect claims that come to be widely believed. Obama's birth in Africa, the stolen election, or the claim that the COVID mRNA vaccine permanently alters your DNA. Now, what are the sources of such far-fetched ideas? Through controlled experiments and survey data, the book isolates the two leading sources. One is extreme partisanship. Because of confirmation bias, our preference for information that aligns with what we'd like to believe, we tend to embrace fanciful claims that support our party. That tendency is strongest among diehard partisans, a larger group than in the past because of party polarization. The second driver is more selective. Some of our minds, those inclined toward dogmatic thinking, are more receptive to conspiracy theories. If you believe that the bodies of extraterrestrials are hidden away at Roswell, you're also more likely to believe that Obama was born in Africa. Now, the remedy for this problem is vexing. As the book makes clear, there is no easy cure to stem the misinformation pandemic. But as political rumor demonstrates, there are things that can be done to reduce the problem. Political elites are particularly important in suppressing as well as amplifying false claims. So are news outlets. When they quote newsmakers' falsehoods without flagging them, they contribute to the misinformation problem. The author of Political Rumors is Adam Berinsky, a political scientist at MIT. Adam, please step up to receive the Goldsmith Academic Book Award for Political Rumors, Why We Accept Misinformation and How to Fight it. Adam, how are you? We've got to step over here. So, yeah, thank you. So this is for you. We're going to step over here so that Martha can get our picture here.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is a great honor. It's especially rewarding because I did a lot of the work while here as a Shorenstein Fellow back in 2017, where I thought we were sort of at a low point in terms of the political environment, but here we are today. So watch for the sequel in a few years, I guess. Good. Thank you.
Now, as I indicated, there's also a Goldsmith Prize for the best trade book in the field of media and politics. What happens when reality begins to imitate what we saw in Animal Farm in 1984? And where are the likes of George Orwell when we need such writers to cut through the fog of deceptive policies cloaked in words like election integrity, democracy, government efficiency? Our trade book winner offers us that writer, and it's none other than George Orwell himself. Orwell's Ghosts is a journey through Orwell's writings with today as the destination. It shows the relevance of Orwell's earlier critiques to contemporary issues like populism, disinformation, inequality, and authoritarianism. To a degree, the book downplays 1984 and Animal Farm, finding more relevant lessons in Orwell's lesser-known works. The book also notes Orwell's personal behavior was often at odds with the behavior he demanded of others. But throughout, the book seeks to clarify Orwell's writings in the context of current developments, offering lessons that today's political leaders and citizens would be wise to heed. The book is also an exceptionally good read, deserving of a place on your nightstand. It will take you back to the 20th century, reintroducing you to Orwell's work while grounding you in our time, clarifying the disruptive forces that are threatening the world's democracies. The author of Orwell's Ghosts is Laura Beers, a professor of British history at American University. Laura, please come up to receive the Goldsmith Trade Book Award for Orwell's Ghosts, Wisdom and Warnings for the 21st Century.
Well, like Orwell, I'm someone who thinks of myself both as a political writer, but also as an artist. So I think an exceptionally good read is the highest compliment I could get. But we are living in Orwellian times, and it's probably been good for book sales, but I'm not sure it's good for the state of the world. And thank you for this, and I hope that my book can be a contribution to a more civilized discourse.
So for our Explanatory Prize, I am so grateful to Mike Greenfield for the vision and the generosity in driving the creation of this award. And I would like, first of all, to thank our judges, Joel Gurin, Laura Manley, David Russo, Ayushi Roy, and Dick Toffel. Mike challenged us to find the reporters who peer inside the local and state and federal machinery of government and explain it and how it affects individual lives in ways that are often missed or misunderstood. Probably should not surprise us that trust in government declines if people only encounter its institutions in cartoon form. So the next time that you hear the deep state disparaged or public servants scorned, well, just bookmark the series that we celebrate tonight. The Washington Post's magisterial account of the most inspiring people you have never heard of. Who is Government? By Michael Lewis, Casey Sepp, Dave Eggers, John Lanchester, Geraldine Brooks, Sarah Vowell, W. Kamau Bell, published by Washington Post Opinions.
The series focuses on the people who work in the federal government. And if it's about anything, it's about exploding the stereotype of the bureaucrat. It's about what these people actually do as opposed to what politicians with some angle tell you they do. I hope that what people take away from the series is a different picture of the federal worker. The people who are working for the government, far from being sources of waste, fraud, and abuse, I think are the best among us. The series showed just how hungry the population is for some understanding, something other than just the daily noise that we get about the federal government.
This series profiles 7 federal workers whose jobs could not be more different. But what impressed me most was how this series shows what unites these very different people. Their dedication, expertise, and drive to make a difference for this country.
I'd like to invite Casey Sepp to accept the award on behalf of this extraordinary team. Congratulations. You want to say a few words?
I should say thank you, first of all, to the Washington Post for running this extraordinary series. Michael, when he asked us all to participate, said, you're going to be joining a team I call the Avengers. So on behalf of the Avengers, thank you. But I should say on behalf, actually, much more urgently, of the 2.3 million people who work for the federal government, who do not deserve the chaos and duress and the harassment they are experiencing, whose stories are urgently needed. So we were honored to tell the story of a few good bureaucrats, but there are countless more. So when you leave, go find one and tell their story. Thank you.
And now for the Investigative Prize. At a time when the actual workings of government can dissolve like a signal chat, or in one, investigative reporters have to be explorers and pathologists and detectives and artists and analysts and master craftsmen with all the tools that we bring to bear to get to the truth of what is happening. Choosing the best of them is a wonderfully, inspiringly difficult job. So I'd like to thank the judges who did the harrowing work of narrowing 170 or more entries into our 6 finalists. Mike Balsamo, Kathleen Carroll, Mike Greenfield, Kathy Cayley, Jerry Mitchell. Carmen Noble, Sasha Pfeiffer, and Andrew Bautran. The finalists: Fast and Fatal by Jennifer Galland, Susie Nielsen from the San Francisco Chronicle.
What we found was shocking. From 2017 through 2022, more than 3,300 people were killed in police pursuits. The vast majority have died in chases over nonviolent crimes or traffic infractions. This story exposed the hidden death toll tied to police pursuits, one of the most dangerous and unregulated law enforcement activities in the United States. What surprised us most was how rarely police officers are held accountable for engaging in reckless chases. We identified 140 police officers who were accused of criminal conduct or violating their own policies during a chase that killed someone. Just 6 of those officers were convicted of criminal charges.
The San Francisco Chronicle didn't just stop with the numbers. They did deep reporting to find out why people were dying. The paper got results. Members of Congress pushed regulators to do a better job of tracking police pursuits, and a national policing group developed new standards for police chases.
Next we have Care 11 Investigates, Recovery, Inc. A.J. Legault, Steve Eckert, Brandon Stahl, and Gary Knox and Kelly Dietz from Care TV.
The most telling example is a double murder case where we revealed the killer did not receive the care his treatment facility claimed to have provided him at the very moment he was committing the crime. Our reporting focused on widespread fraud and exploitation within Minnesota's booming addiction recovery industry. What surprised us most was just how widespread and brazen some of the behavior was. Taking people to watch movies and billing it as therapy, a single employee billing as if they worked more than 200 hours in one day, companies billing taxpayers for services that people were not receiving, while the government turned a blind eye.
What impressed me was the sheer volume of on-the-record material that was shown to viewers. Former employees and clients went on camera, identified by name, and described services that they did not deliver or receive. The stories were easy to understand and told from the taxpayer's point of view. This is your money that's being misspent.
Our third finalist is Medicare, Inc., How Giant Insurers Make Billions Off Seniors by Christopher Weaver, Tom McGinty, Anna Wild Matthews, Mark Marmont, and Andrew Mullica of the Wall Street Journal.
Of the thousands of patients insurers alone said had HIV, only 17% were on life-saving antiretroviral medicines that doctors recommend for everybody with the virus. Our recording focused on abusive practices in the Medicare Advantage industry, where insurers add costs for taxpayers and jeopardize vulnerable patients. What we learned was that insurers have industrialized the game of making people look sicker on paper in ways that increase their payments. We identified $50 billion over a 3-year period in extra payments for conditions that no doctors treated.
The Wall Street Journal team analyzed billions of Medicare records. They reverse engineered a payment algorithm, and they wrote thousands of SAS code to query a CMS server. These reporters drilled down into unethical practices that contributed to the growing tide of fury against these private insurance companies that are prioritizing profit over well-being.
Fourth, we have Our Troops' Wounded Brains by Dave Phillips of the New York Times.
I learned that the problem is much bigger than I first assumed. In the quest to find an edge in combat, the military has created equipment so powerful that it went beyond what the human brain could handle. I investigated whether the repeated shock waves that soldiers are exposed to when they fire their weapons, something that the military has always said was safe, is actually damaging their brains. Despite billions of dollars worth of research, the military had repeatedly misdiagnosed this problem and thought it was PTSD. The leadership thought this was a psychological scar, but in fact, it was a physical injury to the brain.
What impressed me most was the dogged reporting of Dave Phillips. The military hid these injuries that were affecting those serving on the ground, in the air, and at sea, but he uncovered the truth.
Fifth, we have The Right to Remain Secret by Katie Rush and Casey Smith of the San Francisco Chronicle and the UC Berkeley Investigative Reporting Program.
What surprised us the most was the plain language used in these secret deals that explicitly promised to bury, destroy, and keep confidential serious misconduct. What we learned is that for decades, California law enforcement agencies had used these confidential agreements to oust their problem officers, sending them off with sanitized personnel files so they could easily be hired by an unsuspecting agency. Our reporting showed that departments agreed to hide this misconduct despite their belief there was clear evidence of wrongdoing.
The story focused on the erasure of disciplinary records, so that even after police officers do the worst offenses, they're able to get new jobs in other departments as if nothing had happened at all.
And finally, she ate a poppy seed salad before giving birth, then they took her baby away, by Shoshana Walter, Marianne McCune, and the staff of the Marshall Project and Reveal.
Women have been reported to child welfare authorities over positive test results caused by poppy seed bagels, muffins, salad, even the most commonly prescribed blood pressure medication to pregnant women. Our reporting focused on how hospitals across the country are screening pregnant patients for drug use using drug tests that are highly prone to misinterpretation and have false positive rates as high as 50%. This has led hospitals to report families to child welfare agencies and to forcible separations and removals of newborns. Every year, tens of thousands of families are reported without any guarantee that the underlying test results are accurate.
What impressed me most was how widespread this problem is. The coverage revealed that at least 27 states are required to alert child welfare agencies after a positive screen, but not one of those states is required to confirm the test results before reporting them.
As you can tell, all of these series represent extraordinary enterprise, doggedness, courage, creativity in doing the critical work of investigative reporting. The winner of the Investigative Reporting Prize is Right to Remain Secret, Katie Rush and Casey Smith.
The San Francisco Chronicle's groundbreaking investigation, Right to Remain Secret, brought transparency to the troubling practice of clean record agreements used by California police departments. The Chronicle filed over 1,000 public records requests, which uncovered more than 300 confidential agreements. The impact of the Chronicle's reporting has been swift and powerful. The State Pension Authority is actively reviewing nearly 50 cases.
We're a little shell-shocked, but We definitely want to thank the Shorenstein Center for this honor. We have often looked up to the Goldsmith finalists and the Goldsmith winner and read their stories and are incredibly humbled to be in the company of some of the most incredible work we've ever read and the best journalists we've ever met. We also have a few other thank yous. We worked on this investigation for 5 years. So there's many people who helped along the way, including our families, our husbands, the San Francisco Chronicle. We want to thank Damien for bravely publishing this story, despite many officers asking us not to. And lastly, we want to thank David Barstow and the Investigative Reporting Program. We were green-ish reporters with an ambitious idea, and you gave us all of your time and talents, and we are forever indebted to you for that. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Goldsmith Career Award lets us meet and celebrate our heroes. I'm proud to share not only an alma mater, but an origin story as a fact checker. A self-described news junkie in utero, Anderson Cooper was 23 when he quit the fact-checking gig and set off to his first war zone with a fake press pass and a camcorder, and basically dared his Channel 1 newsroom not to run coverage that no one else was getting from Burma, Vietnam, Somalia, Bosnia. After 2 years on his own shooting stories in war zones, he was hired by ABC News as a correspondent and then unfolded the career that took him from ABC to CNN and 60 Minutes, capturing dozens of Emmy Awards, Peabodys, the Edward R. Murrow Award from the Overseas Press Club. We have much to discuss, Anderson, but first let's hear from some of your friends.
Over the years, Anderson Cooper and I have worked together covering several major stories. Indeed, whether Anderson was covering a political election, a war, a hurricane, or a mass shooting, he has been the best in the business.
It's like getting a masterclass in journalism every day up close to work alongside him. He is always calm and in command, but also genuinely curious about what the person that he's interviewing has to say.
He really is a model for this particular kind of journalism that's a little more personal, that feels intimate, that feels a connection with its audience.
You are the standard by which we all measure ourselves. And the types of stories that you tell transport people into places they've never been. You're a remarkable journalist, and I am so proud of you and so proud to call you a colleague and a friend.
Anderson Cooper.
All those people actually hate me, but that's okay. I'm kidding.
I'm tempted to talk about your illustrious path, but I'm duty-bound to lead with the news.
Must we?
Yeah, yes. You're leading in one critical institution of the free press, being honored by a second of higher education. If we throw in big law, we would have the trio of bulwarks for freedom.
Yes.
That are all being tested in extraordinary ways. So I'm curious about what has surprised you most about the last 2 months.
I think, look, we're seeing unprecedented assaults in, I think this administration is pulling levers and has a sense of what levers to pull that have never been pulled before in ways that are so far very effective. Certainly I'm fascinated by the assault on private law firms. I think that's, again, it's an extraordinary, it's just an extraordinary thing to witness. It's never been done before, and it is highly effective. I mean, it's now up to like 320-something millions of dollars in pro bono free legal work that these law firms have now agreed to do for President Trump. the repeated assaults on 60 Minutes, on other news organizations. These are all things which I think a lot of us grew up believing that. I mean, I've spent a lot of time going overseas to places that have fallen apart, to places that have turned on themselves and people are fighting each other. And so I'm sort of used to seeing societies disintegrate. I think many people here have always felt that the institutions are kind of firmly rooted in the ground. General Michael Hayden, the former head of NSA, used to talk about the thin veneer of civilization, and that is actually a very thin veneer. And I've seen that very much up close. I think it's been said before, but I think a lot of the institutions which we thought were very sort of deeply embedded in the bedrock of this country are actually more based on norms of behavior and are more easily given, the way media is set up now with companies that own the ownership of media companies, given the way law firms work. There are levers now that can be manipulated and used in ways that haven't been done before. And it's very effective, and it's incredibly alarming.
So since you've covered enough presidents to know, many of them have lost no love for the press and how they're covered, but there's something about this that feels very different. How much is that, do you think, the strategy that is being pursued, and how much are the changes you're talking about in ownership and the structure of the media itself?
Look, I think this has been, there's been a big evolution, obviously, in media in the United States, and ratings and the ownership of these companies and the expectation for media centers to be profit centers for larger corporations. I think that has added to the vulnerability of reporting today, the vulnerability of journalism today to be targeted, and we're seeing that play out in a number of realms right now. I just think this is we have not seen this, and I think it's unclear where the direction of it is going. Ultimately, I'm optimistic about this country. I'm optimistic about things in general, having seen the alternative, but it's really disturbing.
20 years ago, an interviewer asked you what drew you to war zones, and you said that the molecules in the air were different, and that in all the places where there was conflict, it was a sort of highly charged atmosphere, and that you were very interested in issues of survival and what determined whether someone survived or not. Do you feel those molecules in the air now?
Look, I think. No, it's different. I mean, look, I spent the early years of the 1990s in Bosnia and former Soviet Georgia, and briefly in Rwanda and South Africa and Israel and Gaza and wherever there was fighting going on. That is different than what we have here. I've seen societies fall apart. I'm not a people throw around the Civil War term a lot. We sort of heard that a lot in people during the height of the election, people kind of being interviewed talking about that. I've seen civil wars up close. I think nobody here has really seen one unless they've been serving overseas, and nobody who's seen one up close would really talk about something casually like that. I think it can be an overstatement. I'm certainly optimistic on the future of America ultimately. But I think it's an unprecedented time. I don't know what journalism can fail at doing what we think journalism can do. I think a lot of people put a lot of faith in journalism as being, okay, well, that's one thing that's going to stand up. And the legal system, well, certainly that's going to stand up. That's something we can rely on. But, that can fail too, as we've seen. The fact that the law firms are not standing together in opposition to this is remarkable. It's not remarkable, but it is. It only adds to sort of it makes everybody vulnerable in the legal profession.
Well, many people have noted that unlike past administrations that tried to target an individual out-of-favor news organization, that other newsrooms have also not acted together in defense of the Associated Press. And so what is different?
What is different?
In how journalists and news organizations are reacting. Like if there isn't collective action and response from big law, it doesn't seem like there is from news organizations either.
Yeah, look, I think everybody's trying to figure out. Look, I don't speak for anybody other than my own little self, but I think everybody's trying to figure out a way through this, figure out how to deal with it. This is unprecedented, and I don't think a lot of. I mean, I had not considered the various forms of assault that news organizations are under. It was not in my, the business of news, the corporate ownership of news was not something I ever really paid attention to. It had no bearing on my job. I never heard from those people. I never thought about the business side of things. And so to suddenly see these levers which can be pulled, it's alarming. I don't know where it's going, and I certainly think, I think we're obviously in an unprecedented situation.
A lot of the post-game analysis of the 2024 elections talked about the movement of audiences from traditional forms of media to newer ones, and to new platforms and voices that are often not typically categorized as news. How do you think about the relative influence of institutions like CNN or the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal with the forces and voices of TikTok and Substack and YouTube? How do you think of that?
Look, I think I believe in the power of storytelling. I mean, you see these remarkable journalists who you've honored. I mean, every one of them has done just incredible work that has affected change and gotten people it's opened to people's eyes to things they hadn't considered. That doesn't go away. The way stories are told is always evolving. The Vietnam War correspondents who I studied as a kid and looked up to, the way they were able to tell stories, it took days for film that was shot in Vietnam to get to Japan and then finally end up on American televisions. It took, the difficulties getting out reporting. We can now go places that journalists back then could never even consider going and report live from. Often we're ahead of relief workers or the military in circumstances. So it's constantly evolving. I think having these platforms like TikTok and stuff, if you can figure out a way to tell stories on them, that's great. And I think the fact that every person alive today has more access to more information than ever before can be a remarkable thing, and it's a remarkable opportunity for storytelling. I'm personally not particularly interested in somebody's opinion as much as I am in information. And as a viewer, I don't watch or listen to a lot of opinion stuff. I know that's obviously very popular. It's just not something I really don't care what some anchor thinks about something. And I include myself. I don't even know why you're all listening to me, because I feel like a fraud. I mean, I don't care what some anchor thinks, like some overpaid, blow-dried anchor thinks, and I include myself in that overpaid part. Though I don't blow-dry my hair. But, I think there's opportunities for storytelling on all these platforms, and all these media organizations are trying to figure out ways to, shoot vertical video and get their stories out to populations that aren't watching an evening newscast or aren't watching cable in people's busy lives. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to do that, and it's an exciting challenge as a storyteller to try to figure out how do you do that. I was covering the LA fires, and while my crew was, I drove out to Altadena. Everybody was going to the Pacific Palisades. I thought, let's go to Altadena. I just drove to a street corner that there was a fire all around, and we ended up spending 8 hours there. My crew came in, and we broadcast there for 8 hours. But while they were getting ready, I went on Instagram and I just shot a bunch of things while things were blowing up around me and put them on Instagram. And so there's ways of reporting now, and you can get information out, and I think that's an extraordinary thing. So there's a lot of opportunity, but so much of what we see and hear is opinion discussing what reporters are actually reporting. And I think I get why that's popular, and I get why people listen to it, but I think I'm hopeful that as we evolve and figure out ways to tell stories better on other devices, that we'll see increased actual reporting on TikTok and things like that.
I mean, my highly unscientific, and you can challenge this, ratio is that when you were early in your career, probably 90% of what was in the newspapers, on the news, people were consuming was sort of fact and information based and about 10% opinion. And it feels like because of exactly the expansion and democratization of means and methods of communicating, that it now has flipped.
Yeah, that's probably true. Look, I will also say, look, when I was growing up, newsrooms were overwhelmingly white, middle-aged men. I mean, there were 3 channels. There was ABC, CBS, NBC, and not to denigrate any of those channels, I worked for CBS, but, it was, I mean, I'm an old white man. There were old white men telling what was happening in the world, and the newsrooms were, pretty homogeneous, and I know diversity is no longer allowed and it's illegal, but I think diversity is a good thing. And I think the more voices you have in a room, in a newsroom, in any room, with different perspectives, and particularly if you're telling stories and you're reporting, that is only a good thing, and it only gets better. So to me, the explosion of voices is a potentially a good thing. We just have a lot of irresponsible voices and a lot of voices, there's market incentives to, be the most outrageous or the loudest or the angriest. Anger is an emotion which is somehow acceptable on television. Other genuine emotions seem less acceptable. But I think there's a lot of good to be said about the democratization, but it does come with, there's a lot of people in the room, and not all those people in the room have standards and have ethics, and also a lot of people make mistakes, and journalists make mistakes, and we need to be reflective and course correct. If we've done something wrong, you own up to it, and if you made a mistake, you own up to it, and you try to do better.
Some of the most intimate reporting you're doing is for your podcast, All There Is, about some of the deepest, most consequential events of our lives, which is when we lose someone we love. What inspired the explorations of grief, and what have you learned now after 3 seasons?
Yeah, so I started this podcast. I was going through boxes of stuff that belonged to my mom, who had died in 2019 at the age of 95, and discovered that she had also stored away boxes of things that belonged to my dad, who died when I was 10, and to my brother, Carter, who died by suicide when he was 23 and I was 21. He killed himself in front of her. And so I suddenly was faced, as the only survivor from my little nuclear family that I grew up with something probably everybody in this room has done or will have to do, which is going through the things left behind by your loved ones. And I found it to be such a lonely, sad experience, and so difficult. And I came to this discovery that I had never actually grieved. And I discovered this. I started doing this podcast because I was fascinated that I couldn't really find much about going through your loved one's things. And I started talking to people about it. I started recording the conversations, and I put it together, and people seemed to listen to the podcast. And then I solicited voicemails at the end of the first season, and because I thought, if there's something people have learned in their grief and they want to call in and leave a message about it that others would learn from, that might be beneficial. And we got about 1,000 calls the first time around. Ultimately, now we've had 7,000. I've listened to all of them. And listening to 1,000 calls, very intimate calls, it was overwhelming for me. And I hadn't planned to do a second season of the podcast, but I was sort of motivated to at least start going through these boxes again, which I'd stopped doing. And I went down after listening to these 1,000 voicemails. And the first box I opened up was a box turned out to be my dad's papers. He was a writer. And the first file I opened up was an essay he'd written called The Importance of Grieving. And in it, he talks about what happens to children who don't grieve. And he quoted a psychologist, a guy named Robert Furman. And this was a paper he'd wrote in the 70s. It was never published. I didn't know he'd written it. And the psychologist talked about what happens to children who do not grieve. and how they go through their life with kind of a melancholy that they can never quite put their finger on. And I realized that my dad was writing about me, and I realized I had never actually grieved. And I also realized that my entire career of going to war zones and stuff was really motivated by my inability to allow myself to feel, and I wanted to go places where I wanted to understand how to survive from other people, because I was fascinated by why my brother didn't survive and I did growing up in the same house. But also I was able to feel other people's grief tangentially when I was overseas, and then I was able to leave and then continue to run from my own grief. So I sort of, for the first time in my life at age 57, kind of turned toward, my own grief, and doing these interviews has been part of that process.
And how much does that now shape the encounters you have just with strangers?
It's extraordinary. I mean, I used to, I'm freakishly pale, so I'm noticeable. So people come up to me in the street and ask for photos because I'm so pale. But now,
that's the reason.
Yeah, that is the reason. And most of the encounters now I have though on the street or in airports, even just flying here today on the plane, are people coming up to me, talking to me about who they've lost, and they are the most extraordinary encounters imaginable, and I'm grateful for them. And a woman stopped me as I was going into I live in a firehouse in New York, and so I was going to my front door, and she just stopped me the other day, and her husband had just died, and she has 2 kids. And we talked for 20 minutes. I invited her to my house, into my house, and thankfully she didn't turn out to be crazy, because I get those people too. But they're lovely encounters, and they're the most meaningful conversations. I can't believe we're not all talking about this. Like, we all live in the homes of dead people. We don't know who lived in the houses we live in or the apartments we live in before. Like, we all think we're like the first to experience this stuff. We all think we're the first to go through traumas and dramas and the mishigas that's happening in politics. This has occurred for generations for people, and grief, everybody has lost people. And it's amazing to me that, I for 47 years since my dad died, I've thought about it every day. It's all I think about. I'm amazed we're not all talking about it all the time.
It's like the ultimate journalistic inquiry of what do people need to think about and know about that they aren't talking about.
Yeah, we all want to be seen and heard and felt. That's a line from a play my mom used to talk about, and I forgot what play it is. But, and I think that's very true. We all want to be seen and heard and felt in different ways. And I've spent my life going to places and asking people why. Like, why you go to Rwanda and the genocide, why you talk to Hutus, why are you killing Tutsis? Like, why? And sometimes, for me, ultimately, I got to a place where living in a world where sometimes there isn't a why, and how do you live in a world where sometimes there isn't a why, is an interesting proposition to me.
I'll ask one more question, but I want to give, especially our students, a chance to ask, and so I invite.
By the way, I spoke to a group of 30 students in there. They're so friggin' bright.
Yeah.
It's so encouraging, and it certainly.
That's part of the whole deal.
Yeah, gives me hope.
So you can line up at the microphones. In the meantime, we talked a little about the decline of trust.
Shouldn't you all be studying for midterms, don't you?
We'd rather be here.
Okay.
That trust, the attack on trust feels increasingly like a tactic. Undermine trust in science, in evidence, in the free press. What's then, if it's deliberate, what are the effective countermeasures?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody knows the effect. Look, I don't think anybody has an answer for, clearly, mainstream media doesn't have an answer for how to effectively, respond. It is a very difficult thing. I keep coming back to, first of all, just for me, try to do the best job I can, be as accurate as possible. If I've made a mistake, immediately own up to it, apologize for it, and learn from it. And just be honest in your dealings, in your own life and in your professional life, and just try to be as good a person as possible and work as hard as you can to understand and do your job to the best degree you can. to me, that's the only agency I have to affect anything, is just getting better at doing my job. And all I see are failures on my own part. I mean, the thing about reporting, which I think is so extraordinary, at least, there's many extraordinary ways and there's different kinds of reporting, but going to a place where something has happened and stepping into somebody's life in the worst moment of their life, getting to Haiti, the morning after the earthquake, and anything you have in your mind that you have as a reporter thought in advance, oh, well, I'd like to do this story, It's not a story, it is life and death. And yeah, the molecules of the air are charged in a way. And it is not some story that you're reporting on that's already happened, that you're just documenting. It is life and death that is unfolding before your eyes in real time, day after day after day. And you wake up and you think, okay, well, maybe I'll do this story today. And you step outside and there's a woman with a wheelbarrow and 3 dead children in it, and she's trying to find where to bury them. And you're able to, if she is willing, she will let you step into her life and spend the day with her, because she wants the names of her children to be known. And to me, that is a privilege. But the frustrating thing is, it's impossible in that little camera lens, no matter how good a writer you are or a photographer you are or anything, to fully account for and bear witness to that, and to do justice to that. So that's the challenge.
In the great tradition of show, don't tell, I think you just answered the question about trust.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Angel. I'm from Harvard Grad School of Education, and I used to be a journalist in Washington, D.C., reporting on U.S.-China politics. So I've always admired your work, and thank you so much for being here today and share your stories and journey with us. So my question is, so when we were doing a television show before, we wanted to emphasize on education. We wanted to discuss about education policy and what was going on, but was less juicy compared to some politics that was going on back then. So we saw that as something that was potentially underreported, but I wish there were more attention to it. So my question for you is, what are some of the global issues that you think is underreported and you wish that could receive more attention? Thank you.
I mean, the list is huge. I mean, obviously there's, the good news is there are so many opportunities and places now for reporting that, I mean, the information is out there. It's a question of how much is it amplified. If you are genuinely interested in education stories, you can find them. But yes, it's difficult to figure out. I mean, every day I have an hour-long news program each night. There's a fire hose of, particularly right now, there is a fire hose of things happening, coming at you every day, just happening. And it is, what do you decide to focus on? And where are your resources? Where are other people, reporters? How much time can you give? What are you able to add to the conversation? I'm not a big believer in sort of telling people, there's a lot of things I'm interested in. I'm fascinated by Central Africa. I'm fascinated by DRC Congo. I've spent a lot of my life traveling throughout DRC Congo and formerly Zaire when it was Zaire. I was there for the fall of Mobutu, who I was obsessed with since I was a little kid. I was a very strange little kid. But not everybody is interested in DRC Congo. I understand that. I think there's many reasons to be, but I'm not going to every night do something on DRC Congo because I know not everybody has that interest. I'll do it to the extent that I can. But I think there's a whole host of things which are not focused on enough, and it will always be that. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, certainly education is a tough story to tell, and it's certainly right now the cuts to the Department of Education, to the Civil Rights Division is interesting. We did that a couple of weeks ago. there's a lot of untold stories, and that's the remarkable thing about journalism is that you can, if you're interested in something and you can get there and you can tell it, there's a lot of platforms now you can, and to me that's one of the wonderful things about the times we live in right now, which is not the case as it was when I was a kid growing up.
Good evening. My name is Wilfredo Gomez. I'm at the Grad School of Education. I think one of the things that I've been struck by as I've been going through coursework this semester is really wrestling with this question of the word culture being one of the 2 or 3 most slippery words in the English language, right? So I wanted to ask, with that being said, from your vantage point, how would you assess the landscape of American culture at the moment? And given your characterization of the media and storytelling, how do we move forward with telling a story that is unifying around this question of American culture? And can that be redeemed in some ways?
You don't get easy questions.
Yeah, it's a better question than the answer that I'll be able to give in the time that I could possibly give it. As you said, the meaning of culture, it can mean a lot of different things. I think I don't really know how to answer that question. I don't really know. I don't have a good answer. I think, what do you mean by culture?
Well, that's the question, right? Particularly, but I think in particular, as I engage classmates and peers in conversation, particularly as I think about the sort of worry of people who are my neighbors, who are international students, who are wrestling, who are dealing with anxiety and depression in this moment, is how to make sense of culture, how to make sense of this contemporary moment, right? And how do you make that legible to one another in a meaningful way so that we humanize ourselves?
Yeah. Look, I think, to me, the answer to that is, and it's a small answer because that's a big question. The thing I view as my job is to step into people's lives and bear witness to their culture, to their struggle, to their experience, and to try to present that in an accurate way. I'm not talking about like on a nightly basis on a news program. I'm talking about going to a place and telling stories, or doing something for 60 minutes, going to a place, telling a story. Bearing witness to walking in somebody else's shoes. I think walking in somebody else's shoes is an incredibly valuable, important thing to do, and it's something that I don't hear a lot of people being encouraged to do these days. We're encouraged to hear our own voice and learn our own voice and tell our own story and project that, and I'm all for that. But I also think walking in someone else's shoes and trying to understand from their vantage point how something might look, to me, I find that to be, in my own life, one of the most impactful things to help me become a better person. It's why I try not to have just people arguing at each other on a cable news show. There's plenty of that out there. It doesn't interest me as a viewer. It doesn't add much light. It's a lot of heat, but it's not a lot of light. I'm a much bigger believer in actually trying to sort of assess your own culture and your own vantage point and think, well, maybe I'm wrong. What if I'm wrong? Nobody seems to ask themselves anymore, what if I'm actually wrong? What if my ideas aren't right? I think that's a valuable question to ask yourself. And I'm open to being proved wrong all the time. I think I'm probably wrong. And so I think while I'm all for people representing their culture, I also think understanding someone else's culture is incredibly important. More important than ever, maybe. It's not a good answer. I'm sorry, though.
Go here, and then we'll go up there.
Hi. Thank you for...
By the way, can I just say one thing? I'm so thrilled to see Doris Kearns Goodwin here. I'm such a fan. And
Just did your podcast.
Doris was on my podcast, which I was honored. But in times of crises on my program, we call Doris, and she kindly comes on my program and gives a historical perspective to things, because I think it's so important, especially when you're young and you think wow, no one's ever been through this, or this is so screwed up. It's never been like this. And in fact, it has. Like Doris pointed out to me recently, like there have been assaults on the civil service before, you know? Was it Jackson? Andrew Jackson destroyed, you know, put in all like, made it a patronage system and like gave it to people who supported him, gave them civil service jobs. And it took generations, and it took Teddy Roosevelt to become the civil service commissioner, and I learned this all from Doris, to actually reform the civil service and make it not this party bosses handing out these jobs. So like knowing that, oh, this has happened before, I find it helps me sleep at night. And so thank you, Doris, and I love you. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. Thank you for being here. Well, kind of to preface, but as someone in the foster care, I've gone through a lot of grief as well. And mainly, you talked about your conversations with others who have gone through loss. Have you found any common threads with these people that have helped you feel less alone and in your journey through healing and grief?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, without a doubt. I've learned, I mean, I knew nothing about grief. I mean, I've experienced death, but I knew nothing about actually grieving, crying. I mean, now like my voice quivers and shakes talking about it, but that's because I've been running from it for 40 years, and it's only now that I'm turning to it. I've learned extraordinary things. Stephen Colbert blew my mind when I first started this podcast with us. He quoted J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote to a friend, "What if God's punishments are not gifts?" And Stephen has talked about learning to love the thing you most wish had never happened, which blew my mind when I heard it. Like, is that actually possible, to learn to love the thing you most wish had not happened in your life? And that concept was the beginning for me of sort of trying to understand grief. And I've come to understand what that means and have come to appreciate that. And I'm not sure I'm fully there yet, but I am the person I am because of the losses I experienced. And you are the person you are because of the experiences that you have had. And while you wouldn't want to have had those experiences, perhaps, I didn't want to lose my brother and have my father die. I become more human, and I understand loss because of that, and I understand human suffering in a better way. I don't fully understand everybody's suffering, but I can be more empathetic. It's made me a better person. So I am grateful for that grief. There's another guy, Francis Weller, who's this Jungian psychotherapist who, there's like thousands of grief books and everybody sends them to me, and I haven't really read any of them because I like anything that says like, hey, 5 quick, easy steps to get over grief. I'm sort of like, I don't think it's going to work for me. But a woman named Claudia who lost their child sent me this book by this guy named Francis Weller. It's the one grief book I opened up. And this guy's brilliant. And he talked about developing a companionship with grief and turning to grief and kind of opening up a space inside yourself for it. And the remarkable thing is, once you do that, and I'm not saying I've fully been able to do that, but I've started to turn to it, you recognize its power. And Andrew Garfield, the actor, who I never thought I would be getting advice from an actor, but he lost his mother, and he talks about the wound is the only route to the gift, which is a reference to a Rumi poem. But that idea that the wound is the only route to the gift, to me, is just mind-blowing. It's a paradox. It is only, I didn't want myself to feel grief as a child. It so terrified me and scared me, and it so hurt me that I buried it deeply, and I ran from it for 40 years, which is why my voice quivers now, because to even address it is hard for me. But the irony is, I ran from it because I didn't want to feel the pain. But in not feeling the pain, I used to hear people talk about, I feel my loved one inside me. I carry them with me in my heart. And I always thought, that sounds like a Hallmark card. I don't know what they're talking about. it's only by allowing yourself to feel the pain of grief that you then get to feel them inside you. And so for the first time in my life, I feel my dad inside me. That's incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I won't do that again.
Hey, Anderson. Great to finally see you in person. My name is Abiram. I'm a student at the business school.
Cool.
And also a writer for the newspaper at the business school. So
awesome.
I like to describe myself as a journalist, but that's a stretch.
Cool. You're like Michael Lewis.
I kind of say I'm disappointed there are no tequila shots on stage and no Andy Cohen shots. But my question was kind of for you is, I'm curious, you mentioned at the very beginning kind of the perception of journalism in America today, and it seems to me that for the last 10 years, every journalist comes on and says, the public doesn't trust the media satisfaction or just approval ratings of the media have plummeted. A lot of media companies are struggling with profitability, and I'm curious what advice you have for journalists, whether print journalists, TV journalists, that are in the field, what they can do to increase the level of trust from all segments of society.
Right.
Because, I'm a viewer of CNN, like you made a point of, anchors shouldn't share their opinions or shouldn't at least indicate which way they lean. I don't think most anchors on TV abide by that rule.
Right. Well, I actually didn't say that in particular, but I understand. I agree in general.
Sentiment.
I'm not interested in hearing their opinions, but yeah,
Right.
a lot of them do share it. And I have shared mine and often regretted it. But I think your question is really interesting, and I think it's an important one. First of all, I think the term media, is so broad that now, like Alex Jones is media, but I necessarily don't really think of him as a colleague. So I try not to kind of paint it with a broad brush. But as somebody, as yourself, you're interested, you're writing and interested in going, pursuing that, and I think that is a noble and good thing. I don't know. I try not to get too. There's only so many things I can in my own world control, and I try to focus on those things. So I try not to look too broadly and fret and lose sleep over the what other people in the media are doing, and I just try to get better at what I'm doing. So for advice, my advice would be get to be the best writer you can possibly be and get better at what you are doing and in your own behavior, in your own interactions with subjects, in your interactions, not to mention in your own life, but just in your professional interactions with subjects and people whose stories you are telling. Be relentlessly honest and relentlessly ethical, and do the best job you can to tell their story. And to whatever the story you're writing, do as good a job as you can. The only way people's perception of the media changes, people, yes, in surveys, people say the media this, the media that. It's such a broad term, it can mean anything. Generally, I have found that people who say that to a surveyor, they do have people they like in the media. They have programs they like. They have a person they believe in, but they just think everybody else sucks. And so I think the only thing you can really do is do the best job you can do. And try to do that time day after day after day after day, and hopefully you can find a place to do it where there's other people who are trying to do that as well. And I think that's the only way things change. Right now there's a market for assaulting reporters and assaulting what reporters are saying, and there's a real reason to do it. There's a strategy behind it. I get that. I'm not sure there's much to combat that except doing our jobs better and just getting better at what we're doing and not making mistakes and not, I don't think everybody giving their opinion and everything becoming opinion is the way to go. There's plenty of that out there, and there's always going to be a market for it. But I think there should be a market for reporting and just telling people's stories. I mean, the stuff the folks at the Washington Post and all the writers who are working on the book that Michael Lewis has put out, it's great writers telling great stories about real people doing real things. It's not opinion. It's just really good reporting and beautiful storytelling, and it makes a difference. It changes the way people see the federal government. Hopefully, it should. If anybody reads that book, sees those stories, those are the most read stories in the Washington Post, I believe, for that year, that series that started this whole thing off. So, I think it's inspiring to see the folks whose work we saw today, and just know there are people out there doing the work and doing it really incredibly well. And I want to live in a world where that matters and where that ultimately affects change. And I hope that's the world we live in. So.
Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Victor. I'm a senior here at the college studying government. First, I just wanted to thank you for being such a good role model for queer kids growing up here in the United States. I watched you growing up, so it's nice to have you here with us today. Now, my question is so related to the technology advancements you were discussing earlier and how it's made us more connected and allowed us to share more information more broadly. At the same time, I do think it's also been incredibly isolating in that it has created these information bubbles that it's really tough to break out of once you're in them. And so my question to you is, how does our current media landscape entrench this isolation and this practice of isolation and having people only learn the things that they're interested in learning and nothing more beyond that? And if you have any recommendations for either how readers themselves can break out of those bubbles or how the media landscape can try and encourage people to look at perspectives from across the aisle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of the media who's in that business is not going to be interested in trying to get you to go elsewhere and break out of that bubble because there's market incentives, obviously, for that. Look, I interviewed Bill Gates recently about this, and he was talking about how, when he viewed the internet revolution, he thought it was going to be this explosion of factual information and that everybody at their fingertips would have access to actual truth and information, and this was going to be this incredible thing for society. It didn't even occur to him the growth of misinformation and disinformation, and that it would actually have the effect that you talked about, which makes me really freaked out about his predictions for AI, because if he got it so wrong about that. And I think the AI piece of this is a whole unknown that I don't even know. I'm not even smart enough to know what it's going to be. I don't think anybody has any idea the effects of this, but I do think it's potentially terrifying, just because we won't even know what visual images are real now. At all. So I think that's a whole other concern. But look, you can find out any information you want. You can find out what is true and what's not true. And you can find out, look, eyewitness testimony is fallible because two people who are good, decent people can see the same event and see it completely different ways and will testify under oath about it and convince that they are right. So I think it's incumbent on everybody who wants to find out what is true and what they believe. Unlike most previous generations, 50 years ago, a person standing where you're standing would not have been able to find out factual information. You would have relied on ABC or NBC or CBS and watched that, and you would have gone to a library and read some books. You can find out what is real and what's not, and you can break out of a bubble incredibly easily. You can see what people you disagree with are saying. There's so much out there. I just think it's, I don't think it's true that it's hard to break out of it. A lot of people just don't want to and don't want to hear new things or hear competing ideas or just don't believe the people delivering them or just don't want to. And, I don't know what you're going to do about that other than you can tell people they should listen to other things, but I don't like to eat broccoli. I don't like people telling me I have to eat broccoli. I know it's good for me. I don't think you can force people to do it. I think you just have to keep having broccoli available and, gradually. My kids like broccoli. I think they're insane, but I'm glad they do. Yeah, I don't know if that answers, but I'm optimistic because the information is there, and people can find out information, unlike in previous times.
I'm afraid we only have time for one more quick question. So I'll come down here.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you for being here. My name is Justin. I'm a doctoral student in the School of Public Health. And my question for you is I want to go back to your meditations on grief. So you mentioned in your remarks today that you're surprised that more people don't sort of talk about grief and loss. And we had this sort of collective trauma of the pandemic, which I feel like we haven't fully reckoned with. What do you think would be made possible if more people had an honest reckoning with their grief? What kind of society would be created by?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, the pandemic is so fascinating to me because I think we still do not even comprehend the crushing effect it has had on American society. I mean, not to mention the million people who died, which no one talks about because they're dead, and we don't talk about grief in America. It's not allowed. I mean, it's not something that people are comfortable with. It freaks people out. Grief became privatized. In the 1800s, grief was public. It was communal. Became privatized in like the 1920s, 1930s in America, as people were dying in hospitals, and it was not something that was discussed. So the dead from COVID are not discussed. We whisper the names of our lost loved ones. We whisper it in voices only we can hear, because it makes people uncomfortable. And the entire American project is about happiness. Everybody, look at the bestseller lists on books. It's how to be happy, all these books on happiness, as opposed to like humanness or being the best human. Like being the most happy is a high bar, and talking about grief that makes me uncomfortable. So it's not allowed. We talk about a loneliness epidemic in this country. I think so much of the loneliness is buried grief. I've listened to 7,000 voicemails from people who are deep in grief. I've listened to hundreds of hours of my podcast listeners' voicemails. And the number of people who wake up at 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 and realize they have never grieved, and they've been carrying around these boxes of grief that they've buried deep inside them, as I have for my entire life. The effect of that is it cuts you off from everybody. If you don't allow yourself to feel grief, you spare yourself the pain. You don't have the deep sadness, but you also can't experience joy, because you can't have one without the other. And you live in this middle ground, and that's where I've lived most of my life. And I don't want to live there anymore. But that living in that middle ground, it also can have the effect of keeping you completely cut off from other people and not able to share yourself with other people, because you are holding this stuff down inside you. And so to be able to, if you can turn and face your grief, you can then relate to other people in a much better way. These conversations I have on the street with people are deeply personal. And I reveal things to complete strangers on the street who I've never met in grief. In our losses, we have this bond. I think it would go a long way on this loneliness thing. I think so much of it, especially among men, is this buried grief of grief, and I mean grief in many ways, not just from somebody who's died, but failures of failure and grief from life events that have occurred. Their life hasn't turned out the way. And I think we all feel so much of American society is isolated from each other. And I think a big part of that is buried grief. Thank you.
Anderson, this school trains students from all over the world to go out and serve and improve people's lives. And you do that every day, and we count you as one of us.
Well,
thank you for this.